Story 1. My wife and I are recently married, but have been together since December 2019. Ever since then, we have had nothing but problems with my family, particularly my mom and my one sister, as well as occasionally my brother, sister-in-law, and dad. My wife and I have talked multiple times in the past few years about whether we feel like it has gotten to the point of us needing to go no contact, but haven't pulled that trigger quite yet. This past weekend, however, and the aftermath are having us seriously consider it. I guess I just need some advice. The background lead up. My wife and I were asked to help with a home project painting for my brother and Sill's new house. The only supplies that were brought for said project was one single paint sprayer and one single roll of painting tape, even though we had 7-9 people at various points who were there to help. More tape was later purchased. My wife, my mom, my Sill, and I started taping up the parts that needed covered, and my brother started painting behind us. There wasn't a whole lot to tape, so once we finished there wasn't anything to do other than sit around and wait. Eventually my sister starts painting, and my wife and I decide around 7 p.m. that it would probably be smart to try to order food for everyone. My wife is with one group on one side of the year talking about food orders, and I am on the other side with my mom and sister. My wife heard them yelling, and was concerned, especially due to previous history, that something was happening, so she came over and asked what was going on. Here is a play-by-play of this conversation. Sister: hands me paint sprayer, your turn. Me: oh, okay, I thought I was supposed to go get food. Sister: too bad. Mom: I did ask you to help paint. Me: well, I did help tape. Mom: well, I didn't ask you to help tape, I asked you to help paint, didn't I? Me: I suppose. Wife: what are you guys yelling about? Mom: oh, we were just giving him crap. Wife: oh, okay, it just sounded like yelling. Sister: he can talk to his family without you. It's none of your freaking business. Wife: huh. Sister: you have no right to be a freaking jerk to my mom. It's none of your business, and he can talk to his family without you around. Wife: I was just asking a question about my husband. Is there a problem with that? Sister: you don't get to talk to my mom like that, you witch. Wife: again, I was asking a simple question about my husband. Sister takes a couple steps towards wife. Wife walks towards sister. Sister is literally centimeters from wife's face. Wife places her hand on sister's chest and tells her to back off, and then sister started swinging. Basically, my sister started swinging on my wife, and my wife put her hands up to block her face and accidentally hit my sister in the face. After this, I pulled my sister back, and my wife stepped back. My sister was yelling things like, "She fucking hit me, call the fucking cops," etc. After my sister eventually seemed to calm down, I let her go, and she lunged at my wife again, and this time got a hit in. I pulled her back again, and then my brother and Sill walk up and start yelling at my wife. Sill says that my wife is making them look like trash to their new neighbors, and my brother tells us to get the fuck off his property. My mom started yelling at my wife, telling her she was being a bitch, and that she had no right to come at my mom like that, even though my wife hadn't even moved yet from the spot where she was standing. Fast forward, over the past few days, we have gotten many text messages and phone calls. The gist of those is basically continuing to blame my wife, and telling me that I am a terrible brother, son, and uncle to sister's kids, who were also present for this entire scenario. Additionally, we need some old tax forms for some financial paperwork we need to fill out, and while my wife's parents sent those to us as soon as they were able, my parents are holding them hostage and flat out refusing to give them to us. I was told that I would have to drive an hour to their house to retrieve them and have a conversation with my mom, and that my wife was not welcome to this conversation. Additionally, that my wife is no longer welcome in their house. When we called and asked if my mom could please just email them to us, we need them, her exact response was, maybe. Withholding our financial documents feels like it should be a last straw for me, but it's really hard, and I want to make the right choice. Edit 1. Hi all, thank you for the comments. My mom finally gave us the tax returns. She had them because she has always filed for my siblings and I. In regards to everything else, my wife and I will be going no contact. We are currently sitting down making plans and putting the rest of our affairs in order to cut the ties. Edit 2. Wife here. I want to clarify because I see more than a few comments talking about this. My husband intervened the second it got physical. The reason he did not intervene before that point is because during previous conversations where we have attempted to work things out with his mom and sister, they have communicated that if they have something to say to me, I am perfectly capable of defending myself against them. I agree with this, and from the very beginning I had always asked my husband to let me speak instead of just him. Part of this is because I am just that type of person, but it is also mostly because my husband, due to severe anxiety and constant abuse throughout his whole childhood, shuts down when there is conflict with his family. I am the type of person that stays very level-headed in high-stress situations, and so therefore am typically more equipped to defend either or both of us in those scenarios. In this case, I can handle any of them yelling at me and have no issue defending myself. I honestly prefer it. The second it got physical, however, he jumped right in. Update: we are officially no contact with my mom, sister, brother, and brother's fiancé. We decided to set a timeline for 6 months, wife's suggestion, at which point we will require them to attend family therapy with us to attempt to repair things. Basically, they will have one chance, and if they refuse to go to therapy or therapy doesn't go well, it will be permanent no contact. As of right now, things are going fairly well for us. My anxiety is a lot lower, knowing that I don't have to worry about them. The main thing that sucks is the letter I wrote to my nephew explaining that we won't be around for a while, but we still love him a lot and can play Xbox together anytime is being withheld from him by my sister. So who knows what they all are telling him. Also, my other sister, who I am still in contact with, is getting a lot of abuse from our family that I cut off. Her and I and our partners have always been treated badly and are the black sheep of the family. So now, since they do not have access to me, she is getting extra. She would love to cut them off as well, but it's a lot harder for her as she lives right down the street from our mom. She's hoping to move away someday soon though. It's really hard, but I know that this is the right decision, and maybe one I should have made before it got this bad, but my wife and I are just hoping to go forward and live our best lives. On the plus side, now that I don't have those assholes interfering, my sister that I didn't cut off, and I can actually build our relationship. It was hard to do that previously as my mom always got in the way on both ends, but now she can't. Thank you everyone for your comments. It helped me realize that even though it is hard, and I have been conditioned my whole life to stick by my family no matter what, they aren't treating me like family and I deserve better, and my wife absolutely deserves better. I have been picking up some of her favorite things regularly as part of an apology, and I'm hoping that I can continue to work with her and our therapist to be the best husband, and to put her first. Story 2. This incident occurred about 2 weeks ago. I was fortunate enough to find some inexpensive ammunition to use for target practice with my pistol. The range I frequent is a well-maintained indoor facility with an attached shop, and I have a good rapport with the staff. This time, I brought 2 of my firearms, a modern sporting rifle which I use for hunting and my large caliber revolver. I also met up with a friend. The range has safety rules posted everywhere, along with a constantly running video about proper conduct. When the lanes opened for my friend and me, I noticed a man teaching his petite girlfriend how to shoot. She seemed to be having a good time shooting a small .22 caliber rifle. It was nice to see someone going through the steps of learning. I followed the proper procedure, uncasing my rifle with the barrel pointed downrange and unloaded. I placed the magazines and 3 boxes of ammunition on the table, one of which contained the hunting rounds I intended to use when I finally planned a trip. I then turned around, put the case away, and placed my revolver on the table in its holster. At that moment, my friend distracted me because his rifle case had a stuck zipper. When I turned back, my handgun was gone. I began to panic, only to see the woman holding my revolver, attempting to fire it. The gun clicked on an empty chamber. "What are you doing?" I demanded, nearly having a heart attack as she spun around with the gun, almost pointing it at me. Her boyfriend stopped her before she completed the rotation. She asked. "Sorry, man," the boyfriend said, trying to defuse the situation. Knowing how excited new shooters can get, I sighed and shrugged it off. I even handed her a few bullets to try since the range only rents smaller revolvers and semi-automatic pistols. We shared a laugh as she fired the large revolver, nearly knocking herself off balance when she treated it like the much smaller firearm she had started with. My friend and I resumed target practice, sending our targets to the far end of the 50-yard range. After a box of rounds, we decided to play a game, racing to hit the targets with our rifles. I lost by one shot. As we neared the end of our hour, I loaded another magazine. Suddenly, I felt a sharp jab on my shoulder. I turned to find the woman standing there, looking at me expectantly, with her boyfriend nowhere in sight. "Can I help you?" I asked. "I want to shoot that," she said, pointing at my rifle. I blinked, surprised by her demand, not request. Now, I should have said no, but this was the same woman who had nearly committed a serious mistake earlier by taking my handgun without permission. I glanced at my friend, who merely shrugged. "Well?" she demanded again. "Ma'am, do you even know how to shoot a rifle?" I asked, hesitant. "I know what I'm doing. Just give me the gun," she replied, crossing her arms like a child. This rifle has a pretty strong kick." "Are you sure?" "Yes." "Move," she interrupted. I had loaded 3 hunting rounds into the magazine, and I stepped back as her boyfriend returned to the scene. Now, this rifle was one I had customized. It wasn't a standard model. It fired heavier 145 grain target rounds and 185 grain hunting loads, which packed a serious punch. While I could handle the recoil and had set the rifle up for these loads, it was super light, meaning it would jump if the shooter didn't know how to brace it properly. Her boyfriend asked why she was handling my rifle, knowing it was the loudest one in the room. "She told me she knew what she was doing," I replied. He covered his face as she put her eye dangerously close to the scope, without giving herself any breathing room. Either he wasn't planning to date her for much longer, or there was something else going on because he said nothing to correct her. She knelt down, using the shooter's bag for support, but the rifle butt wasn't tucked into her shoulder correctly to mitigate the recoil. She fired the first 5 shots and smiled, barely missing getting a black eye. I reached up and turned off the microphone on my ear protection as I had left it on from earlier. Then, she slapped the trigger home, and boom, a large fireball erupted from the barrel. She dropped the rifle, thankfully after accidentally engaging the safety. The gun landed against the shooter's rest as she stood up, holding her eye. Her protective glasses had a crescent-shaped crack, a classic scope kiss mark on her brow, though, thankfully, she wasn't bleeding. Her boyfriend leaned down and said something to her as she appeared ready to either cry or scream at me. He quietly packed up their range bag while she stormed off into the store area. I finished the magazine and packed up my things, preparing to leave with my friend. As I was putting my rifle into its case, the range officer tapped me on the shoulder. I turned my ear protection back on. "I saw what happened. While I applaud your patience, please just say no next time," he advised before walking away. As I exited the range and removed my protective gear, I could hear the woman loudly complaining, demanding that I be kicked out for letting a new shooter use a dangerous gun. She was ranting at the range manager, someone who knew me from my time working as a security guard. He knew that I would never let someone try something without ample warning. To appease her, he took me aside into the security office. "Did your rifle really blow up in her face?" he asked. I warned her about the kick, and she refused to listen. "She was holding it wrong, which is why her eye is bruised," I explained. He sighed and asked to inspect the rifle. I then informed him. By the way, she also grabbed my revolver without asking when I first arrived. His eyebrows shot up, and he reviewed the security footage. Sure enough, the video showed me turning my back to help my friend while the range officer was on the other end. Her boyfriend was at another table, reloading magazines, and she had grabbed my gun from its holster and carried it carelessly to her bay. "I've seen enough," he said, and asked me to wait in the shop. Meanwhile, the woman was boasting to her boyfriend, who stood there looking exasperated. The manager walked up to her. "Ma'am, after careful consideration, I'm banning you from the range for a year for multiple reasons. The main one is that you could be facing jail time if this man calls the authorities on you for dangerous handling of firearms and disturbing other patrons. Be grateful that I've done business with him for a long time and know that he doesn't want to discourage new shooters. When your ban is lifted, you can return. But you will be required to take our new shooter safety class before being allowed back on the range," he explained. He handed her the ban notice and a flyer for the class. I stood there with my friend, doing my best not to laugh, as she stormed past us, muttering under her breath, her irritated boyfriend trailing behind. The manager then approached us and handed us complimentary range time cards. "Sorry about that. If it happens again, just call the range officer to handle it," he advised before heading back to his office to finish the paperwork. Looking back, the whole situation was wild. I'm thankful she wasn't seriously hurt, as firearms are not toys and can be extremely dangerous if mishandled. I've seen the consequences firsthand when someone at this same range accidentally shot through my range bag, which was right next to my foot. I can't emphasize enough the importance of basic gun safety rules. Always treat a firearm as if it's loaded. Never point it at anything you aren't willing to destroy, including lives. Keep your finger off the trigger until you're ready to shoot, and always know what's beyond your target. In an email I received today from the range manager, I learned that in the 3 hours she had been there, she had nearly shot her boyfriend twice while they practiced stance and grip. She had repeatedly broken the rule of keeping the barrel pointed downrange and violated the no food or drink policy, along with several other rules. I genuinely hope she learns from this experience, and I wish her boyfriend good luck surviving that relationship. Story 3. A close friend of mine, who would love to brag about this, but can't due to confidentiality reasons, though it takes very little imagination to find the public notifications that the case generated, has given me permission to share this story. It begins with his impulsive decision in mid-2018 to try out the paid features of a dating app for a week. For the usual reasons, he clicked through the payment process, provided his credit card details, and agreed to pay $6.99. He didn't see anything indicating it would be a recurring charge. In hindsight, this was a bit naive, but as someone just entering adulthood with the financial means to afford such things, he lacked experience dealing with tech companies. He wasn't particularly impressed with the paid features over the free ones and, after a couple of weeks, stopped opening the app. He deleted it from his phone and essentially forgot about it. Fast forward 3 months, he noticed a charge for $6.99 paid to a vague name like Social Media Inc. After some investigation, he realized that he had been charged this amount every week for months. He ended up calling his bank, which provided enough details for him to connect the dots. After trying unsuccessfully to find a way to contact customer service, he re-downloaded the app. However, there was no obvious way to unsubscribe. He followed the help links, but the provided instructions didn't work. Eventually, he found an email address and sent a brief description of his problem. The response he received was dismissive and repeated the same unhelpful instructions from the app. This led to a series of emails over the course of a week. He provided increasingly detailed information about the screens he was encountering, while receiving responses that became more dismissive and even contemptuous. Eventually, he received slightly modified instructions that included updating the app. It was clear there had been a bug, but there was no apology. By now, the time he'd spent dealing with the issue only added to his frustration. He requested a $1.45 refund for the weeks he hadn't even had the app installed on his phone, but his request was sneeringly denied. Suspecting others might have experienced the same treatment, he Googled class action lawsuit against well-known dating app and discovered he was correct. A law firm, conveniently located just one area code away, had filed a complaint on behalf of a class of people with similar complaints. He left a message with the firm, and an attorney returned his call about an hour later, eager to hear his story. They asked him to gather some bank statements, Google Play Store account records, and write a couple of paragraphs describing his experience. He sent a neatly compiled PDF package with all the requested information. A week or so later, there was a second interview with that attorney and one of his colleagues. By the end of it, they invited him to be the lead plaintiff in their class action lawsuit. Fast forward 2.5 years. During this time, my friend invested maybe 20 or 30 hours, mostly in phone calls and one in-person meeting with the same two attorneys, who, as it turns out, were the entire firm. Eventually, he received a phone call notifying him that the legal team representing this massive tech company had caved as the court date approached and agreed to a settlement of $23 million. My friend received a modest 4-figure incentive award in return for being the lead plaintiff. The attorneys likely did much better for their efforts over the 2.5 years, which was a risky David and Goliath situation for them. The lawyers cheerfully invited him to contact them about any future perceived injustices, which he has done. Unfortunately, tech companies have become more focused on including arbitration clauses, so it's probably a one-time victory for him. Still, in a world where corporations increasingly prey on consumers by hiding crucial details in lengthy terms and conditions, and monopolizing every aspect of the economy, my friend now has a template for standing up for himself. His approach is simple yet effective. I just want to make you aware that I'm someone who stands up for myself as a consumer. It's become a bit of a hobby, and I'm pretty good at it. I have no issue with businesses making a fair profit, but if you're trying to squeeze me, I assure you, it won't be worth it. And if you're uncertain whether I mean what I say, just Google my name versus dating app. It can be a bit much at times, but I should mention that he has a very patient significant other. Story 4. I'll keep the details vague because I'm still with this organization. I work for a government department, which has offices and locations spread throughout the state. I'm based in a city that's about a 2.5-hour train ride from our head office. At the time, I was part of a team responsible for policy, process, and quality assurance. Our team members worked remotely from various parts of the state. Our previous manager had been promoted for being exceptionally skilled at his job, and we were now under the leadership of a new manager, Steve. Steve came from the banking industry, and he was eager to whip us lazy public servants into shape. A few days after Steve started, he called a teleconference to inform us that he wanted the entire team to be at the head office by 8 a.m. the next morning for an all-day, in-person meeting. He said he wanted to see us in person to size us up, understand what we were doing, and compare us to the private sector's standards. Due to the nature of our work, we were spread across the state, so in-person team meetings were rare and usually planned well in advance. We were already adept at video conferencing long before it became common. Some of us tried to explain to Steve that most of us lived far from the head office, and attending the meeting on such short notice would mean travel expenses, meal allowances, overtime, and other logistical considerations. Steve didn't seem to care and bluntly told us, "Just be at head office tomorrow at 8 a.m., before abruptly hanging up. Now, I should mention that I'm one of a few union representatives in our department, and I know our workplace agreements inside out, especially the sections dealing with travel, allowances, and overtime. So, I entered into a bit of malicious compliance. If Steve wanted us there, we'd comply, but it was going to cost him. I quickly emailed my team, explaining what Steve had done by mandating the 8 a.m. meeting and outlined what we needed to do. Because we would have to travel outside of our normal work hours. Our workday would begin the moment we left home and wouldn't end until we returned home. Some team members traveled the night before, which entitled them to overtime for their travel, a dinner allowance, and accommodation, with the same benefits for their return trip. As for me, I left home at 5 a.m. to catch the only train that would get me there on time, which entitled me to a breakfast allowance, a lunch allowance, and a dinner allowance if I returned home after 9 p.m. Despite the train running slightly behind schedule, I made it to the meeting on time. By then, 3 hours of my workday had passed, and I hadn't done any actual work yet. After a brief round of introductions, Steve spent the next 4 hours talking about his experiences in banking, how much money he had made for his previous employers, the luxury vacations they sent him on as a reward, and how we were all stuck in the past compared to the private sector. He made it clear that he didn't think our work met private sector standards. His arrogance was evident, as he came off as the kind of finance executive who had failed upward thanks to others doing the hard work. By 3 p.m., my entire team was now earning overtime pay, and Steve was still going strong, clearly enjoying the sound of his own voice. I, on the other hand, was hearing cha-ching in my head as the clock ticked. At 5 p.m., Steve abruptly looked at his watch and decided to end the meeting. Without any formal closure, he simply said, "That's all for today. Go home now," and walked out. After exchanging a few awkward glances with my colleagues, we packed up and made our separate ways home, having accomplished nothing all day. I made it to the train station pretty quickly and saw that I could catch an early train that would get me home by 8 p.m., or I could take a slower train that would get me home closer to 9:30 p.m. You know what? Somehow, I just couldn't catch that earlier train, so I ended up taking the later one, staying on the clock for another hour and a half. Plus, I got my dinner paid for. What an unfortunate coincidence. The next day, I submitted my expense claims. 4.5 hours of overtime at double the rate, train tickets, taxi fares to and from the station, and allowances for breakfast, lunch, and dinner. My personal claim alone was close to $500. The rest of the team followed suit, making sure to claim everything they were entitled to. Steve tried to fight us on the approval of these claims, but he quickly learned that, unlike the banking world, most public servants are unionized, and we would raise a ruckus if he denied our contractually guaranteed allowances. His all-day ego trip ended up blowing a $6,000 hole in his budget. Unsurprisingly, while Steve remained our manager, he never again required us to attend an in-person meeting. Video conferencing became just fine. Steve only lasted 6 months before he left for new opportunities. In reality, he just went back to his old job at the bank. It turns out, he was the one who couldn't keep up. Story 5. In December 2020, during the height of the pandemic, I was working as a contract stress engineer, responsible for ensuring structural integrity and safety. About a week before Christmas, I received a call from the agency handling my contract, informing me that my contract would not be renewed. I live in the UK and had been working from home for about 6 months due to the lockdown. I was part of a small team, and one member, in particular, was a self-absorbed individual who seemed to think very highly of himself. He often used complex jargon and went on long-winded explanations in front of the client, trying to impress them, essentially a professional at sugarcoating things. Meanwhile, I was more direct and concise, sticking to the facts when providing updates on my analysis. The project itself was chaotic. The client kept changing their requirements for how they wanted certain components analyzed. As a contractor, I simply had to follow their instructions. I never found out the exact reason they decided to let me go, but I had a good idea. I suspect the constant changes and delays were blamed on me, and the self-important colleague likely convinced them that he was more valuable than I was. For some context, this particular colleague wasn't exactly easy to work with. Once, I was tasked with reviewing some of his analysis. I found several errors, corrected them, and sent them back. He didn't take kindly to that, not one bit. He decided to complicate things unnecessarily. Instead of using the simpler, correct method I provided, he spent 2 days buried in a math textbook, searching for a more advanced matrix method to achieve the same result. It was as if he was obsessed with showing off his knowledge of matrices. Remember, as contractors, we were paid to get the job done efficiently. He had a straightforward method from me, but instead, he wasted 2 days of the client's time and money pursuing something more complicated. A few days later, while making coffee, He bragged about how the client was really impressed with his matrix method. I was taken aback. You didn't come up with that method yourself, I thought. He had simply found it in a book, took credit for it, and acted as if he had made a groundbreaking discovery. It was frustrating, but I let it go, even though his arrogance and self-importance were infuriating. Now, enter the second problem. Our so-called leader, who is also less than ideal, but I won't go into too much detail about him. About 4 months after I was let go, I had been struggling to find work for months. I'm married with 3 kids, and our savings were depleted. In fact, my eldest child had to dip into their trust fund to help us get by. I eventually took a job at a warehouse, working 12-hour shifts on the weekends. It was physically demanding work, and the supervisor wasn't exactly pleasant to deal with. During the week, I continued to look for better opportunities. One day, while sitting at home, my phone rang. It was the second colleague. "Hi, how's it going?" he asked. "I haven't heard from you in months, and now you're calling." "Oh, hi. How's it going?" I replied. "Do you remember that analysis you did? Well, the client has lost the files. Do you still have them?" he asked. "You haven't spoken to me in 4 months, never offered any help, and now you want my help." I responded, "Yes, I think I do, but they aren't the latest version. You'll need to double-check for any later updates." "Great. If you can send them over, that would be fantastic," he replied enthusiastically. "Send them. Why don't I send you somewhere you can get lost for good?" I agreed. "Sure, I'll send them over." I was truly shocked by the audacity of the request. The client lost the files. Well, that sounded like their problem, not mine. Now, you might wonder why I gave him the files. Well, I knew something that he didn't. The reason I was able to summarize the results of the analysis so quickly was because I had written a custom code to process the output files, extracting only the relevant data. So, when I handed him 40 files, I knew it would take ages to manually sift through them to find what he needed. And, as I mentioned earlier, those were outdated files. Enjoy searching through them. As for the colleague who thought he was so clever, I couldn't help but feel a little satisfied knowing that the process was going to be a lot more difficult for him than he anticipated. In the end, they got what they deserved, and I moved on, finding some satisfaction in knowing that, even in a tough situation, I didn't make things easy for those who took advantage of others. Story 6. This all started because I was feeling a bit bored earlier this week. I was attending a cross-sectional meeting on an important but highly complex topic involving representatives from the government, local authorities, healthcare, and the charity sector. As often happens in meetings like this, we delved into numerous unrelated topics, making little progress. The meeting was held at the government's main building, which is either freezing cold or, in this case, swelteringly hot because the heating was on full blast. Concentrating was a challenge. A break was called, and I took the opportunity to check my parking, which was really an excuse to slip off site for a cigarette. An aside, I've tried to quit smoking 3 times this year. It's clearly going really well. So, I dutifully went to check on my car, crossed the street, and lit up a cigarette. That's when things took an unexpected turn. A young man, visibly angry, came marching toward me. "Young angry man. What's your problem? I was only here for a minute. I was just dropping something off. What are you going to do about it?" Me. I didn't do anything to anyone. "Young angry man. I want you to get on your machine and cancel it right now." Me. I didn't do anything to anyone. Now, I have to admit, I wasn't exactly helping the situation. Instead of responding with the usual surprise or trying to de-escalate, I chose to entertain myself, which might not have been the wisest choice. You see, I'd been having a rough couple of weeks, and my way of dealing with stress was to act a little silly. Plus, I just finished rereading Men-at-Arms by Terry Pratchett, and the temptation to respond like the character Coalface was too strong to resist. Young angry man wasn't impressed. His finger was now uncomfortably close to my nose, wagging with frustration. "Young angry man. Where do you get off? You think you have all this power? Well, I'm going to show you. I casually slipped off the wall I'd been leaning on and raised my hands to get his attention. Me. Mate, I'm clearly not a parking officer. Look at me. Aside. In this area, traffic wardens wear a hat and vest that clearly say traffic warden with a local authority's name. Plus, they always have a ticket machine. I, on the other hand, was wearing a charcoal suit, a lilac shirt, and definitely no ticket machine. Young angry man. Yeah, you are. I saw you checking out that car across the street. Which was true. He had seen me checking on my own car. Me. That's my car, bud. I was just checking the ticket. Young angry man. No, you have to sort this out now. Me? I can't. Sorry, but I have to get back to my meeting. I flicked the end of my cigarette away and briskly walked the short distance back to the building, flashed my visitor card at the security guards, and thought that was the end of it. However, just as I was starting to laugh about the situation, "Guard, get down on the ground now." I turned around to see a group of armed security officers rushing in. The young angry man had followed me onto the government property, and now 2 rifles were aimed directly at him. He dropped to his knees and instinctively put his hands behind his head. I hadn't noticed, or perhaps had chosen not to notice, that the young man had followed me, presumably to continue his argument over the parking ticket I hadn't issued. I glanced at the scene, got a nod from the guard to proceed, and headed back to my meeting. An hour or so later, after another unproductive and stifling session, an embarrassed admin aide approached me. She politely asked if I could follow her, and I was led deep into the government building. As we turned the final corner, I realized why I had been summoned. The young angry man, now a young terrified man, was sitting in a holding area, watched over by more armed guards. The chief of security, who I happened to know quite well, greeted me immediately. "Chief of security, sorry to bother you, me, but this young man claims you gave him a parking ticket, and that's why he followed you in here." Me. Sort of. He seems to think I can issue parking tickets. Chief of security, are you serious? Me. Apparently, I give off traffic warden vibes. Chief of security, so he's telling the truth. Me. Within reason. Chief of security, all right, we'll process him. We then exchanged some pleasantries about family and mutual acquaintances before I went on with the rest of my day. For once, I actually know what happened to the young man afterward. He was let go with a stern warning never to trespass on government property again. He was escorted to his car and strongly advised not to return. In the end, he only lost a few hours, still had his parking ticket, and according to one of the guards, probably needed a change of clothes. He was lucky it didn't end up worse for him. Hopefully, next time, he'll be a little more observant. I know I'll certainly be more aware.